IC Sugar. This is my very first light up cake. I've put together an instructional video. Hopefully you enjoy it. I'd like to thank Wayne from Nova Green Electricals for the wiring kit. He's done an amazing job. And most I'd like to thank you all for watching. It's fantastic. I hope you're all safe and well at home. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you. Hi, just going to explain a little bit about how I've made this cake. Again, in my introduction, if you've got any questions, feel free at any stage to send me a message and I'll come back to you. I haven't been trained particularly in cake making. I often find my way with what it is that I want to do and what I want to achieve. So some of the stuff that I've done here is you can do differently or you know, a number of other ways to get the same effect. What I've done here is I've got some hollow tubing, which you can just get from any cake shop. This is where I'm going to put the wires through. And I've used a couple round cookie cutters just to mark out where my door and windows are going to be. I tend to use more solid cakes. I use a lot of butter cake, a lot of chocolate cake, chocolate mud cake. I use ganache. Don't use a lot of buttercream because most of my cakes I can't refrigerate. Just getting the size of the poly tubes for the wires. I've already iced the bottom tier here in chocolate ganache. I hand make my own ganache, usually just chocolate and cream. And I've put a little bit of silver foil into the end of the poly tube just to stop any cake falling in there and blocking it when I try to push the wires through later on. Just use a little bit of melted chocolate to join the two tiers. Something I typically always have on hand is chocolate. It's really helpful for joining a lot of things, stopping things falling apart. Just trying to get a nice even piece of sugar paste. I use Bakewells. I think that's readily available. Just prior to putting this on, I had actually wet the cake slightly with a little bit of water just so the sugar paste adheres, and just some icing sugar just to make sure it doesn't stick to my hand, so it is. So I picked it up and put it onto turntable and just smoothing it down. You can see quickly there one of the, or couple of the holes for the wires. Normally if I was to make a castle cake, I would use polystyrene for the turrets, but in this particular cake the turrets are actually not very tall, and you'll see later on they're actually sort of part of the cake, so I've just decided to do two cakes together, one on top of the other. Silver foil makes a really good pattern when you scrunch it up, so just a little bit of texture on the cake. So I have a few texture mats that I use. I don't use a lot, but I do have a couple that I like. And this is a tree texture mat, and just creates a little bit of interest for the top of the turret. And just putting a little bit of sugar paste underneath just to push out the tiles, I suppose. Sure you can see on the right side there my tub of Isomalt, and I pre-made my Isomalt the day before. Okay, so in this picture I've already done some of the icing or modelling pieces that I want on the cake. You can see sort of the tree effect down the bottom has been done, but I do all my cakes just in white and then I colour them later on. Wasn't overly fussy about where everything sat on this. It's a rustic looking cake. It doesn't need to be perfectly straight. Just again a little bit of water. Just to adhere the sugar paste. You can use a bit of vodka if you want, or you can use some cake decorating glue. You can also see here I've got the wires poking out. I actually wired it up the back of the cake, which you'll see later on. This is just a leaf pattern. So I'm mainly doing that simply because at the back of the cake where you can see where it's wide, and the leaf pattern actually covers the wire joins. I didn't have a pre-design for this cake. It's my first wide cake, so I sort of was winging it. That's modelling chocolate. I find that it holds its shape quite well. Sugar paste, if you need to make something to hold its shape, it sort of it has to dry for a couple of days at least, or a day. But modelling chocolate, you can pretty much put it straight on. So if you've got an unusual pattern or I don't know, like you'll see here, it's got a sort of curve outward. And if I did this in sugar paste, it would have just flopped over if I hadn't let it dry a couple of days. So see here, it holds its shape quite nicely, modelling chocolate. Again, using a little bit of modelling chocolate just to hold the wires out. You can also see in this picture I've actually lifted the cake and put it onto the cake board, which I had already done the day before. I used a cobblestone pattern on the cake board. So basically all that is you just roll it out, roll some sugar paste, put it on your board, put the cobblestone pattern over it, roll over it with a rolling pin, and then trim the edges. You can see here I've put the Isomalt stained glass window on. I made a few of them. I wasn't sure which one I was actually going to like. And I put a yellow one or orange one at the top, which you'll see later on I took off because I didn't really like it. Isomalt is a sugar, and I used black royal icing to do the outline for the stained glass window, and I filled that in with Isomalt later on. And I'm just using some Isomalt pieces just for around the top of the turret. And you can also see that I've covered the wires up now with this. I used the scroll type of pattern. and just covering over the top of the green Isomalt pieces for the windows and the top of the turret. I do all of this in sugar paste. When I first started making cakes, I actually used to pre-color all of the icing, which thank goodness I don't need to do that anymore. It's really it's quite hard work. So everything I tend to do, as I said before, is all in white, and then I'll color later on. So I've done some purple around the stained glass window, and I'm cutting out the shape for the door. What I did here is I put the door over the icing, and I actually ended up deciding I didn't like that at all. So I took it off, I cut out the hole and reinserted the door later on, but you'll see that in later pictures. This is the other thing that I tend to do is as I go along, if something's not looking right, I'll just redo it and take it off and start again. So I'm just putting some rocks around, and it's mainly to cover up obviously to provide a bit of interest, but to sort of cover up the black board that you can see. Rocks really, all they are is a bit of rolled sugar paste, and I've just pushed them against the imprint, the tree imprint, and just stack them up so they look reasonably interesting and just cover the blackboard. It's really nothing too complicated. The cobblestone pattern that I used on the cake board, I've also got some cobblestone pattern pieces around the side of the cake just to create a little bit of interest. Just spinning it around to show the wiring at the back of the cake here. So there's a tube that runs up the back. So that is for the light in the top tier and a couple of the lights on the bottom tier. I think there's 7 in total. A little bit of cobblestone patterning. Okay, so what I'm using here is a mix of gel, petal dust and vodka. Decided to hand brush this on. It gives a little bit more of a glossy look. Airbrushing is something I haven't been doing for a long time. It's interesting, I sort of enjoy it, and I can sort of get the colour on a lot quicker than if I was to hand paint it. Although you can get exactly the same effect by hand painting, it just does take a little bit longer. But you don't need to be an expert, or you don't even need to own an airbrush to do this. Hand painting a bit of colour on, and I just wipe it off with a bit of paper towel, and you'll see in a minute what that does is actually fills in the pattern of the cobblestone. It creates a really interesting effect. I do the same thing with the purple for the tops of the turrets. Sorry. Painted it and then wiped it off, and it just sort of again creates sort of a much more realistic look. You can see the stained glass on the top tier is actually green and orange and yellow. Just felt that was a much nicer mix than the orange I had before. And just wiping off so you can see the nice pattern underneath. I use a lot of paper towel. It's really handy, but it's got to be good quality so it doesn't sort of leave any of the paper behind. Again, this is just chocolate brown airbrush colour. I don't use a fancy airbrush. I just use a basic $100 cake decorating airbrush, which was you can just buy from any cake decorating store. I'm just painting some of the spots that's a little bit harder to get in with the airbrush. But again, I do the same thing. So I airbrush the colour on and I wipe it off with a paper towel, and then I airbrush over it again, and it just makes the pattern, and you'll see later on, it makes the pattern stand out. Modeling chocolate tends to airbrush quite well. It tends to come out pretty much the same colour as the same colour as the sugar paste. So eventually you can't really tell that I've got modelling chocolate, even though when you first look at it, it's yellow and sugar paste is, or cream, sorry, and sugar paste is white. You see, just sort of rubbing it off, rubbing off the bit of the colour. Just use a little bit of matte, or a bit of cardboard or whatever you've got handy, just to stop a bit of the overspray. Again, like I said before, you can do this just with a standard paintbrush. You can use gel, bit of colouring gel or petal dust, bit of vodka. You don't need to use an airbrush. And anyway, you can see here I do also use a brush as well. So I'm just painting a bit of grey over the cobblestone pattern, and it's just I think it's a Wilton grey I've used for this one. Bit of water or a bit of vodka and a bit of the Wilton colouring, and I rub it off, and it gives a beautiful cobblestone look. I do the same thing with the rocks. So I airbrush around it. If you were to hand brush it, you can see here I just hand brush, or I airbrush and hand brush around the rocks, and then again wipe over it. So for the light bulbs, I decided last minute that I wanted to actually make some globes. So I used some gelatin, just made some gelatin balls. This is actually the next day because I had to wait for them to set overnight. And a little bit of green sugar paste just to create some vines. Use a bit of modelling chocolate just to hold the balls in place. And again, I made some, just some wire around to make a little bit of a tree, bit of modelling chocolate, which you'll see in a minute I hand paint. If you look on the side of the cake, you can see some of those interesting effects that you get simply by just wiping the colour off. So that's actually green moss. Well, it's not really moss, but it's flour, egg. You can use honey or you can use golden syrup. It's just in a microwave and your food color, obviously. Um, so 1 egg, 30 grams of flour, 25 grams of golden syrup, and just in the microwave for a minute. Okay, so here's the final product. Thank you all very much for watching my video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please send me a message. I'd be really, really happy to hear from you.